A baby's cries pierce the air, and the massive silverback snaps. Its muscles tense, nostrils flare. Then it charges. Boom! The glass rattles under the impact. People scream. Parents yank their kids away. Another hit, harder. The reinforced barrier trembles. One strike from disaster. The mother clutches her baby, frozen in fear. The gorilla rears back for the final blow. But then something steps in its way. And in an instant, everything changes. The sun beat down on the crowded zoo. Kids licked melting ice cream. Parents shuffled maps. And families leaned over railings to glimpse the animals. Then, a sharp wail. The noise sliced through the chatter, turning heads. A baby in a stroller. His mother, Maria, flinched under the weight of 100 stares. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, pressing her cheek to his hot forehead. The wails only grew louder. His tiny fists balled, and his face scrunched in fury. He cried on, and Maria tried everything she could to calm him. She tried giving him his bottle and his pacifier, rubbing small circles on his back, but nothing worked. And now the zoo was watching. But the eyes that glared at her the most weren't human. Maria barely noticed the towering glass behind her, until now. Inside, a massive silverback stirred. Kanu, the undisputed ruler of the enclosure. And he hated noise. His dark eyes locked onto Maria. Kanu was massive, with about 400 pounds of muscle and bones. The silver gleam of his back shimmered in the blazing sun as he looked up, and his dark eyes locked on Maria's instantly. She froze. What do you think will happen now? Beneath her, the baby's cries became louder and reached a fever pitch. He was aggravating everyone with his wails, especially Kanu. Suddenly his chest began to rise and fall angrily. His nostrils flared, and his fingers curled into loose fists. Maria felt a shift in the air. She wasn't the only one. A few people standing around her began watching the gorilla with worry. Kanu shifted once, then twice, and his lips twitched. It was obvious that the cries were affecting him. The crowd had noticed now. Some took a cautious step back, and a zookeeper near the informational board immediately grabbed his radio. Kanu was their most dangerous gorilla, and he was not taking any chances. But just before he could radio it in, Kanu stood up and began to walk toward the glass. Kanu didn't walk. He charged. The ground trembled, or maybe it was just Maria's racing pulse. Unfortunately, the baby wailed even louder, and Kanu's angry pace quickened. What do you think this angry gorilla will do? The other gorillas shifted uneasily. A younger male turned his head away. Even the juveniles, who were usually mischievous and restless, had quieted. Kanu let out a loud growl, and still the baby wailed. Maria managed to take a small step backward, and the people around her did the same. They were just in time because just then Kanu hurled his massive body on the glass. Boom! The impact shook the entire enclosure. The reinforced glass trembled but held, and the ground beneath their feet vibrated. Screams erupted. A phone clattered to the ground, children cried, parents pulled their kids back, and teens bolted for the exit. The baby's wails slowed into scared hiccups, but only for a second. Then he screamed even louder. His little body even began to shake. Maria reacted badly. She clutched her baby so tight he shrieked. Her heart stopped when she noticed Kanu's nostrils had flared again. He slammed his fists on the glass this time, but he slammed it with enough force to send another loud boom through the zoo. Maria was shaking in fear now, but she couldn't move. Her feet were rooted to the spot, held captive by sheer terror. The zookeeper's voice barked out an urgent order, but she didn't hear it. All she saw was Kanu's rage, the way his eyes bore into her and her child. The third slam was harder, angrier, and now the glass trembling was worse. Kanu reared back, preparing for another charge, and Maria braced herself. She knew this might be it. This might be the blow that would break the glass and send the gorilla charging at her. But she still couldn't move. Do you think the glass will break? The crowd held their breath, and many scampered away. Maria was still too stunned to move. Her heart slammed in her chest as she waited. But the blow never came because, just then, something stopped Kanu. It was a sound, a low grunt. Maria hadn't noticed, but another gorilla had stirred from the shaded corner of the enclosure. Now the second figure moved into the light. This one was smaller than Kanu, but also looked very strict. It was easy to tell that it was a female. She stepped between Kanu and the glass and placed herself directly in his path. She didn't growl. She didn't even challenge Kanu. She didn't grunt or shriek or beat her chest. She just stood there. Then she turned to peer outside the enclosure, and her dark eyes moved from Maria to the baby still crying in her arms. Kanu huffed and puffed. His massive chest expanded and contracted with aggression. His knuckles dug into the dirt. He was a restrained beast who badly wanted to express his anger. And yet, he could not charge because of one reason only, the gorilla in front of him. Her name was Nia. Nia didn't flinch. She stood firm, silent, steady. She had always been different. Where Kanu was aggressive and commanding, she was softer and more thoughtful. And now she was even softer because she had known loss in ways the others hadn't. Weeks ago she had cradled her own infant in her arms, held him close, and listened to his tiny breaths. She had felt the warmth of his fragile body pressed against hers, and she had played with him every morning and night. And then, one day, she didn't, because he had died. The others had moved on because that was the way things were. Even Kanu, despite his protective nature, had grunted his acceptance and left her to her grief. But Nia had struggled to let go. Now she stood between him and the glass, challenging him in the softest way possible. The crowd didn't dare breathe. The tension in the air was suffocating, but it was obvious that the tension in Kanu's massive frame was settling slowly. But not the tension in the baby. His cries continued. Kanu continued to glare at Maria and the wailing baby, but Nia didn't mind. She turned away, not from the danger, but toward the human child. Maria had been holding her breath for so long, she couldn't feel the tightness in her chest anymore. Her baby's tears seemed to be from fear and anxiety now. His tiny hiccups shook her, and his fists curled into her shirt, but she couldn't help him. She was trembling too. She and the entire zoo watched as Nia stepped toward the glass. But instead of slamming her fist on it, she lowered herself to the ground. What Nia did next left the entire crowd in stunned silence. Maria couldn't look away. Something was about to happen. She could feel it. Nia's fingers swept through the straw at her feet, sifting, searching, and scattering the dirt. For a moment, nothing more happened. And then she found what she was looking for and dug it out. The small crowd gasped. In the gorilla's hands was a small, tattered toy. It had once been colorful, but it was faded, frayed at the edges, and worn from time. It was the last piece she had left of her baby. Kanu exhaled sharply as his dark eyes saw the toy, but Nia didn't look at him. She lifted the toy, and in a gesture so gentle it sent a shiver down Maria's spine, she stepped closer to the glass and the wailing baby. She bent forward and carefully placed the toy down, right at the edge of the glass, in front of Maria and her baby. It seemed like a peace offering, a bridge. But it accomplished something else, something great. The baby's cries stopped. They didn't soften, they just stopped. The second his damp red eyes saw the toy. And for the first time since the wailing had begun, there was silence in the zoo. Maria felt the tension in her throat loosened. Everyone in the zoo was in shock. They could not believe the shift they had just witnessed. Some were still clutching their loved ones. Others still had their hands over their mouths from screams that had never fully formed. A father patted his daughter's shoulder, reassuring her and himself that they were safe. A silverback had been moments away from delivering a devastating blow on a glass. But then it had been stopped, not with force, but with something softer. Nia's simple act cracked through the storm in Kanu's head and averted the disaster. Kanu's chest still heaved, but the fire in his eyes had dimmed, and his tight fists loosened. Maria couldn't believe what had just happened either. Her baby had stopped crying. His flushed cheeks were still damp with tears, and his tiny chest rose and fell evenly, but the wailing had stopped. He now stared curiously at the tattered toy, as if some part of him instinctively understood the meaning behind the offering. Maria's hands trembled, but her feet moved on their own, one step closer to Nia. Nia, still crouched near the barrier, watched Maria. She didn't move, mostly because she didn't need to. Maria saw the pain and distress in Nia's eyes, and understood. Before she even realized what she was doing, her palm lifted, and she pressed it against the glass. The zoo fell silent, and then, with a gentleness that shouldn't have been possible for something of her size, Nia lifted her hand and met Maria's touch. The contrast was striking, human flesh against a rough, thick palm, different but the same, warmth against warmth, though separated by an unbreakable barrier. Two mothers, two different worlds, yet the same unshakable instinct, to protect, to nurture, to love. This was such a precious moment, and Maria's vision even blurred. Who would have thought she would cry in a zoo one day as an adult? But she couldn't stop herself. The weight of everything pressed down on her, and she couldn't hold back. A tear slipped down her cheek, and on the other side of the glass, Nia blinked too before she dropped her hand. Her massive fingers curled as she lowered them, and her dark eyes lingered on Maria a moment longer before shifting to the tiny child in her arms to confirm his safety. Then she turned and disappeared into the enclosure. And just like that, it was over. The crowd exhaled in relief and excitement. The moment had passed, but Maria's hand remained on the glass for a beat longer, her palm tingling, as if she could still feel Nia on the other side. Then she dropped it with a heavy sigh. Well, somewhere in the distance, a single camera shutter clicked, then another and another. And, just like that, the spell broke. People surged forward, pulling phones out, but Maria barely registered any of it. The enormity of what had just happened pressed down on her. Her baby shifted in her arms, and he even giggled at something. It was as if he too had felt it. It was such a unique event, and the story didn't take long for it to spread. When the videos hit the internet, they went viral immediately. By nightfall, they had spread like wildfire. The videos, just a few minutes long, captured it all. The chaos, the terror, the charge, Kanu's blows, his massive form colliding against the glass with earth-shaking force, the crowd's panic, and then Nia. The moment she stepped forward, the moment she intervened, the moment she placed the worn, tattered toy down beside the glass, and the moment two mothers, one human, one not, pressed their hands together in silent understanding. The internet erupted. Animal behaviorists, primatologists, and experts weighed in. Some called it instinct, a learned response from years of captivity that is a sign of high emotional intelligence, but nothing more. Others called it empathy, a gorilla grieving the loss of her own child, recognizing the distress of another mother, understanding it in a way most wouldn't believe possible. The debate became fierce, and experts and non-experts threw their voices in. But for Maria, there was no debate. She had been there. She had felt it. It wasn't just instinct. It wasn't a coincidence. It was something a lot more. It was intelligence. It was empathy. It was grief. It was love. Days later, she returned to the zoo. She hadn't planned to, but the pull was undeniable. Besides, she wanted to witness a planned event herself. As she walked in, she realized that the zoo now looked different to her. The gorilla exhibit wasn't just another attraction anymore. It had become something so special. And because of the headlines, visitors gathered in clusters by the enclosure, pointing at the gorillas and taking pictures. Signs had been posted near the glass with a brief retelling of the event with a QR code leading to the now infamous videos. Maria walked down to them and pushed her way through the crowd. She wasn't sure she expected Nia to recognize her, but she hoped she did. Her baby, now calm, nestled against her chest. Maria approached the glass and began to search for Nia. Finally, she saw her. Nia sat near the back of the enclosure, half hidden in the shade. Kanu loomed a few feet away, and the rest of the troops moved lazily around them. Maria hesitated, but, as if sensing her presence, Nia looked up, and their eyes met. Maria's breath caught, and they stared at each other in surprise. It was at that moment the zookeepers arrived. Maria spoke to the zoo owners, and they agreed to find a baby gorilla for Nia. Her kindness had begotten kindness. They agreed that if Nia didn't want the child, they would take it away. Maria and the crowd watched as the zookeepers opened a small part of the glass, holding a large box. When they lifted the box, the tiny gorilla crawled very slowly out. Nia's eyes rounded, and she ran to it immediately. She carried the baby and began to lick and fondle it. Outside, Maria's cheeks were red from smiling too hard. She was so happy she could put a smile on Nia's face, too. Nia turned to Maria. Their eyes met. Understanding passed between them. Maria swallowed hard, then turned to leave. Even if no one else believed it, even if the experts debated it for years to come, Maria knew Nia was very intelligent and very motherly. She smiled, blinking away the tears rising in her eyes. She smiled because she understood now that strength wasn't found in power, force, aggression, or fear. It was found in kindness and empathy, in understanding, connection, and love. And the weight of that connection would stay with her long after she left the zoo, long after the sun dipped beyond the trees and the night rolled in. Some moments, she knew, were meant to be carried forever. Nia's unexpected act of compassion proved one thing: love and understanding transcend all boundaries. In the face of fury, empathy won, and in that moment, two mothers, one human, one not, shared a bond that needed no words. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe for more incredible moments like this. And let me know in the comments, do you think animals truly understand human emotions? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.